The day my son Michael married Vanessa, I smiled through my tears and told everyone how happy I was for them. But beneath that smile, something didn't feel right. The way she looked at me, with that barely concealed irritation, told me everything. I needed to know about my future place in their lives. I just never imagined how quickly I'd be pushed aside, or how dramatically things would change when they suddenly needed something from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and for 43 years I taught 5th grade at Pinewood Elementary. I loved every minute of it, the wide-eyed curiosity, the unexpected questions, the moment when understanding finally clicked for a struggling student. I never had much money, but I had purpose, respect, and a modest pension that I'd earned through decades of dedicated service. When I retired at 68, I thought I'd finally have more time with my only son, Michael, and hopefully someday, grandchildren. Michael had always been the center of my world. His father, Thomas, died when Michael was only 8, a sudden heart attack that left us both reeling. We navigated grief together, just the two of us against the world. I took on extra tutoring jobs after school to afford baseball equipment, summer camps, and eventually college tuition. I wanted him to have everything, even if it meant I had nothing. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years. I drove the same car until it literally wouldn't start anymore. But Michael graduated debt-free, and the pride I felt watching him walk across that stage made every sacrifice worthwhile. He was 32 when he met Vanessa, a striking woman with perfect hair and impeccable taste in clothes. She worked in marketing for a luxury hotel chain and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to wonder if your bank account could cover an unexpected expense. From our first meeting, I sensed her evaluating me. My department store clothes, my practical shoes, my simple jewelry. She was polite enough, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Your son has told me so much about you," she said, extending a manicured hand. It must have been difficult raising him alone on a teacher's salary. The way she emphasized teacher's salary made it sound like I'd been a street sweeper. But I smiled and nodded, determined to like the woman my son had chosen. The wedding was an elaborate affair at a vineyard estate that cost more than my annual pension. I offered to contribute what I could, $5,000 I'd been saving for years, but Michael insisted they had it covered. "Vanessa's parents are handling everything," he explained. "They want to give her the wedding she's always dreamed of." I wore a pale blue dress I found on sale and got my hair done at the local salon where I'd been going for 20 years. When I arrived at the bridal suite to see Vanessa before the ceremony, her mother, Catherine, looked me up and down with thinly veiled disappointment. "Eleanor, there you are. We were just taking some pre-ceremony photos with the immediate family." I glanced around the room. Vanessa was surrounded by her parents, her sister, her grandparents, even her aunts and uncles. Everyone but me. "I'm sorry. Didn't Michael tell you?" Vanessa said, not looking particularly sorry at all. "We're doing most of the family photos. After the ceremony. These are just a few quick ones with my side." I nodded, swallowing the hurt. "Of course. I'll just wait outside." After the ceremony, I stood patiently through countless photo combinations. Vanessa with her bridesmaids, Michael with his groomsmen, both sets of parents together. Finally, I approached the photographer. "Excuse me, I'm the groom's mother. I haven't been in any photos yet." The photographer looked confused and checked his list. "I have the formal portrait list here." "I don't see—" "Mom." Michael appeared beside me, lowering his voice. "Vanessa's running behind schedule. The photographer's pretty expensive. He charges by the hour, so we're sticking to the essential combinations." "Essential?" The word felt like a slap. "I'm your mother." His expression softened with pity, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. "We'll get some casual ones. Later at the reception, okay? Promise." Those casual photos never materialized. Every time I approached Michael at the reception, Vanessa materialized beside him, pulling him away for another toast, another dance, another conversation with her father's business associates. By the end of the night, I had exactly 0 photos, with my only son on his wedding day. Still, I told myself not to be dramatic. It was their day, not mine. I sent them on their 2-week honeymoon to Bali with my blessing and a check that stretched my budget to its limits. "For whatever you need," I wrote in the card, trying to sound generous rather than desperately hoping for their approval. When they returned, things changed quickly. Michael used to call me several times a week. Now weeks would pass without a word. When I called him, Vanessa often answered, explaining he was busy, promising he'd call back, which he rarely did. Sunday dinners, once a sacred tradition, dwindled to monthly obligations that Vanessa frequently remembered last-minute conflicts for. 6 months after the wedding, they invited me to their new home, a sprawling Tudor-style house in Highland Park, the kind of neighborhood where even the smallest homes started at 7 figures. I brought a homemade apple pie, my specialty, and Michael's childhood favorite. "Oh, we're trying to cut back on refined sugar," Vanessa said, taking the pie, with 2 fingers as if it might contaminate her. "But thank you for the thought." The house was immaculate. White marble countertops, plush cream carpets, furniture that looked designer but uncomfortable. Not a single personal photo was visible. I complimented the decor, and Vanessa beamed. We worked with an interior designer who specializes in modern minimalism. She helped us create a space that reflects who we are as a couple. I nodded, wondering when my son had developed opinions about textile choices and accent pieces. The Michael I knew had posters taped to his walls well into his 20s and considered a matching bedding set the height of sophistication. As we toured the house, I noticed a large, empty wall in the living room. "That would be perfect for family photos," I suggested. "I have some lovely ones from Michael's graduation, and from that trip we took to Yellowstone." Vanessa and Michael exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Actually," Vanessa said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use when explaining something to children, "we're commissioning a large-scale abstract piece for that wall. We're meeting with the artist next week. Besides," she added, "we want the photos in our home to represent the family we're building, not the past." I felt my heart constrict. "I'm still your family, Michael." "Of course you are, Mom," he said quickly, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "Vanessa just means we're going for a certain aesthetic, that's all." I left their house that day feeling like a relic, outdated, unwanted, irrelevant. But I kept those feelings to myself, afraid that voicing them would only push Michael further away. The real blow came 3 months later. Michael called on a Tuesday evening, his voice unusually animated. "Mom, great news! Vanessa's pregnant!" Joy surged through me. A grandchild. Perhaps this would be my way back into their lives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Oh, Michael, that's wonderful! How is Vanessa feeling? When is she due?" "August 17th, and she's doing great. A little morning sickness, but nothing too bad." "I can come help with meals or cleaning, whatever you need," I offered immediately. A pause. "Thanks, Mom, but Vanessa's mother is already planning to stay with us for the first month, and we're hiring a night nurse, so we should be covered." Of course they were. Catherine would be there, in the house, witnessing every precious first moment while I was kept at arm's length. I pushed down my disappointment and forced enthusiasm into my voice. "Well, I'm here if you need anything at all." "Actually," Michael said, "there is something. We're having a gender reveal party this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. We'd love for you to come." Finally, an invitation. I spent hours finding the perfect gift, a silver frame engraved with grandmother's pride, and joy, ready for that first precious photo. I had my hair cut and colored, bought a new dress, even splurged on a manicure. This was my chance to be included, to establish myself as an important part of my grandchild's life from the very beginning. The party was at their house, transformed with either pink or blue decorations hidden under white cloths, ready for the big reveal. Vanessa's extended family filled the space. Aunts, uncles, cousins I'd met at the wedding but whose names escaped. Me. A photographer circulated, capturing candid moments. Several women who must have been Vanessa's friends clustered together, examining the cloth-covered decorations and placing bets on the baby's gender. Vanessa herself was radiant in a form-fitting white dress that showed off her small baby bump. Catherine hovered beside her, a protective hand perpetually resting on her daughter's arm as they greeted guests together. I approached with my gift, ready with a warm hug. "Eleanor, you made it," Vanessa said, accepting my hug stiffly. "Thank you for coming." I handed her the wrapped frame, a little something to celebrate the occasion. She smiled politely and passed the gift to a young woman standing nearby. "Ashley is collecting gifts on the table over there. Help yourself to refreshments. We'll do the reveal in about an hour." And just like that, I was dismissed. I wandered through the crowded house, searching for Michael. I finally found him. In the kitchen, deep in conversation with Vanessa's father about investment properties. When he saw me, he gave a quick hug and introduced me. "Richard, this is my mom, Eleanor. Mom, this is Richard, Vanessa's dad." Richard nodded briefly, barely, making eye contact before continuing his conversation as if I weren't there. I stood awkwardly for a few moments before excusing myself to find a drink. The reveal itself was predictably elaborate. Michael and Vanessa stood before a large black box. When they pulled a string, blue confetti exploded everywhere as guests cheered. "It's a boy," they announced, beaming as the photographer captured their joy. What followed was a carefully choreographed series of photos, Vanessa with her parents, Michael with his in-laws, the expectant couple alone, Vanessa with her friends. I waited patiently for my turn, but it never came. Finally, as the photographer was packing up, I approached. "Excuse me, could we get one with me and the parents-to-be? I'm Michael's mother." The photographer looked to Vanessa for guidance. She glanced at her watch. "We're running behind schedule, and we still have the cake to cut, maybe later." Later never came. As guests began to leave, I found myself helping clear away plates and glasses, feeling more like hired help than family. I was gathering blue napkins when I overheard Vanessa speaking to her mother in the kitchen. "Did you talk to the photographer about the family portrait series?" Catherine asked. "Yes, he's coming back next week. He'll do individual portraits of you and Dad, then some combinations with Michael and me. What about Eleanor? Shouldn't she be included?" There was a pause, and I held my breath. "Mom, you've seen her. The photographer specializes in those elegant, timeless family portraits, matching outfits, perfect styling. Eleanor would look so out of place. Besides, she's not exactly photogenic anymore. Those wrinkles, that gray hair she refuses to color properly." "Vanessa." Catherine's voice held a note of warning, but not much conviction. "What? I'm just being practical. These portraits will be on our walls for years. I want them to be perfect." She sighed. "Maybe we can take some casual snapshots with her when the baby's born. Something we don't have to display." I stood frozen, napkins clutched in my hand as their words echoed in my head. Not photogenic anymore. Out of place. Too old to be included in their perfect family portrait. Tears stung my eyes as I quietly set down the napkins and gathered my purse. I slipped out without saying goodbye, doubt they even noticed my absence. The drive home was a blur of hurt and humiliation. I kept hearing Vanessa's dismissive tone. Those wrinkles, that gray hair. As if my age had somehow made me unworthy of being acknowledged as family. The next day, I waited for Michael to call and apologize. Surely he'd noticed I'd left without saying goodbye. But no call came. Not that day or the next or the one after that. Finally, a week later, I received a text. "Sorry you had to leave early. Thanks for coming." That's when I knew nothing would change unless I changed it. I'd spent years tiptoeing around Vanessa's feelings, making excuses for Michael's neglect, telling myself that backing away was the graceful thing to do. But I was still his mother. I deserved better than being erased because my aging face didn't fit their aesthetic. I called Michael directly at his office, knowing Vanessa wouldn't intercept. "Mom, everything okay?" He sounded genuinely concerned, which gave me a flicker of hope. "No, Michael. Everything is not okay. I need to speak with you, alone. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow?" Silence stretched between us. "I have meetings all day tomorrow. Maybe next week?" "This can't wait. Either you meet me for lunch tomorrow or I'm coming to your house tomorrow evening." My voice was firm in a way it hadn't been since he was a teenager testing boundaries. He sighed. "Fine. Lunch tomorrow. The diner near your place at noon." The diner was my territory. Casual, unpretentious, far from anywhere Vanessa or her friends might spot us. I arrived early, settled into a booth, and ordered coffee to steady my nerves. When Michael walked in, looking harried in his expensive suit, I barely recognized him. When had my jeans and t-shirt son become this polished stranger? "I can only stay 45 minutes, he said, checking his watch as he sat down. "What's so urgent?" I took a deep breath. "I heard Vanessa talking to her mother at the party about the family portraits." His face flushed. "Mom, you were eavesdropping?" "I was cleaning up after your guests, and that's not the point. The point is that your wife thinks I'm too old and ugly to be in your family photos." She didn't mean... Yes, she did. And what bothers me more than what she said is that you've allowed it. When did I become someone to be ashamed of? Someone to hide away? I changed your diapers, Michael. I held your hand on your first day of school. I worked 2 jobs to send you to college. And now I'm not even worthy of a place on your wall. He had the decency to look ashamed. "It's complicated, Mom. Vanessa has certain standards for our home. It's important to her that everything is perfect, and I'm not perfect enough." It wasn't a question. "That's not what I meant." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Look, Vanessa comes from a different world. Her family has expectations, connections. Our home, how we present ourselves, it all matters for my career, for our future. And where do I fit into this perfect future of yours? Will your son even know me? Or will I be the embarrassing grandmother who gets an obligatory visit at Christmas, if I'm lucky?" His silence told me everything. "I raised you better than this, Michael. At least I thought I did." He reached for his wallet. "Let me pay for your coffee." "I don't want your money. I want my son back." He stood, straightening his tie. "I should get back to work. We'll talk more about this another time." But we both knew there wouldn't be another time. Not really. Something fundamental had broken between us, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. The months that followed were quiet and lonely. I received a formal invitation to Vanessa's baby shower, but begged off with a convenient migraine. I couldn't bear another afternoon of being invisible. Instead, I sent a generous gift card with a polite note. I tried to fill my days with purpose. Volunteering at the library, taking water aerobics classes at the community center, joining a book club. I made new friends, women my age who wore their wrinkles proudly and whose laughter came easily. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly measuring myself through Michael and Vanessa's eyes and finding myself wanting. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in August, Michael called. "Mom, the baby's coming. We're at Memorial Hospital." My heart leapt. Despite everything, this was my grandchild entering the world. "I'll be right there." The maternity waiting room was filled with Vanessa's family, her parents holding court like royalty, her sister typing furiously on a laptop, aunts and uncles chatting animatedly. I found a seat in the corner, feeling like an intruder at a private party. Hours passed. Catherine received regular updates from the delivery room, sharing them with the assembled family, but never once acknowledging my presence. I sat quietly, flipping through outdated magazines, wondering if I should just go home. Finally, around midnight, Michael appeared, exhausted but beaming. "It's a boy. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. They're both doing great." Vanessa's family swarmed him, congratulations and questions overlapping in a cacophony of celebration. I stood back, waiting for the crowd to thin, tears of joy and sorrow mingling. When Michael finally saw me, his face softened. "Mom, you came." He crossed the room and, to my surprise, pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank you for being here." "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," I whispered against his shoulder. After visiting ours the next day, I met my grandson, James Thomas Mitchell, named for both grandfathers. Vanessa was propped up in bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who had just given birth. She managed a tight smile as I entered the room. "Eleanor, thank you for the gift card. Very thoughtful." I barely heard her. My eyes were fixed on the tiny bundle in Michael's arms. "May I hold him?" Michael carefully transferred James to me, and the weight of him, so small yet so substantial, brought back a flood of memories. I'd held Michael, just like this, marveling at his perfect fingers, his delicate eyelashes, the miracle of his existence. "Hello, James," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother. I've been waiting so long to meet you." In that moment, looking down at his peaceful face, all the hurt and resentment I'd been carrying melted away. This innocent child deserved to know all his family, to be loved from every direction. I would find a way to be part of his life, even if it meant swallowing my pride. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance, sending tasteful gifts and brief, congratulatory texts, but never imposing. I figured they needed time to adjust to parenthood without my complicated presence. Then, 6 weeks after James was born, Michael called. "Mom, could you come over tomorrow, around 10? His tone was strange, controlled, almost formal. But my heart soared at the invitation. "Of course, I'll bring cinnamon rolls." "That's not necessary. Just come at 10, okay?" The next morning, I arrived at their house precisely at 10, stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. Michael answered the door looking uncharacteristically rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said, leading me into the living room where Vanessa sat rigidly on the edge of a white sofa, a sleeping James in her arms. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Is everything okay? Is James all right?" Panic edged into my voice. "James is fine," Michael said quickly. "It's something else." He exchanged a look with Vanessa, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We need your help, Eleanor," she said, her voice stripped of its usual confident polish. Michael sat beside me, hands clasped tightly together. "Mom, there's no easy way to say this. We're in trouble. Financial trouble." "What kind of trouble?" He took a deep breath. "The company I work for, there's been an investigation. Securities fraud. The executives are being charged, and while I wasn't directly involved, my division. Our projects. Everything's frozen. I've been put on leave without pay until it's sorted out." I stared at him, processing this bombshell. "How bad is it?" "Bad." He looked at Vanessa, who was staring fixedly at the floor. "We've been living beyond our means for a while now. The house, the cars, the baby expenses. We're underwater. The mortgage is 3 months behind. And my parents can't help, Vanessa added, her voice small. Dad's business is struggling too. They've already given us what they can. Michael ran a hand over his face. We've applied for a refinance loan to consolidate our debt and catch up on the mortgage, lower the payments, but because of the company situation and my credit. They need a co-signer, someone with stable income and good credit. And there it was. After months of being treated like an embarrassing relic, suddenly my stable pension and spotless credit were valuable. I sat in stunned silence, the irony of the situation washing over me. You want me to co-sign your loan? It wasn't a question. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, Vanessa said, finally meeting my eyes. We could lose the house, Eleanor. James could lose his home. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. And what happens if you can't make the payments? If I co-sign, I'm legally responsible. I'll find another job, Michael insisted. I've got interviews lined up. This is temporary, I promise. I looked around their immaculate home, at the abstract art that now hung on that prominent wall, not a family photo in sight, at the designer furniture and custom drapes that had been more important than including me in their lives. And I thought about the woman I'd overheard just months ago, declaring me too old and unattractive for their perfect family photos. Before I answer, I said carefully, I'd like to understand something. Vanessa, do you remember what you said about me at the gender reveal party? About why I couldn't be in your family portraits? Her face flushed crimson. I don't know what you're talking about. You said I was not photogenic anymore. That my wrinkles and gray hair would ruin your perfect aesthetic. That I was too old to be included in your family images. Michael looked between us, confused. Mom, what? It's true, I continued. I overheard her telling Catherine that I'd look out of place in your elegant family portraits, that maybe you could take some casual snapshots with me that you wouldn't have to display. Vanessa? Michael turned to his wife, whose flush had deepened to scarlet. I didn't mean. She began, then stopped. It came out wrong. I was stressed about the portraits, that's all. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I understand now that I only have value when you need something from me. My steady income, my good credit. Those apparently aren't embarrassing. Just my face, my age, my very existence. Mom, that's not fair, Michael protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Isn't it? I moved toward the door, then paused. You know what's interesting? All those years raising you alone, struggling to make ends meet, I never once felt ashamed of who I was. Not until you two made me feel that way. Vanessa stood, James still cradled against her chest. Please, Eleanor. We're sorry. We were wrong. But we're talking about our home, about James's future. I looked at my grandson's peaceful face and my heart constricted. He deserved better than this. Better than parents who measured people's worth by their appearance or bank account. I'll think about it, I said finally. But if, and that's a big if, I decide to help, there will be conditions. Non-negotiable ones. I walked out of their house that day with my head held high, feeling lighter than I had in years. The power dynamic had shifted, and we all knew it. For the first time since Michael had married Vanessa, I wasn't the one desperately seeking approval. They needed me now, not the other way around. Over the next week, I consulted with a financial advisor and a lawyer, carefully considering my options. I thought about James, about what kind of relationship I wanted with my grandson, and what kind of example I wanted to set. When I'd made my decision, I invited Michael and Vanessa to my modest home for dinner, neutral territory where we could speak as equals. They arrived looking nervous, Vanessa holding James close as if he might shield her from my judgment. I served a simple meal, nothing fancy, but nourishing and made with care. We ate mostly in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, over coffee, I laid out my terms. "I'll co-sign your loan," I said, watching relief flood their faces. "But here are my conditions. First, I want 1 day a week with James. Every week, no cancellations except for genuine emergencies." They nodded quickly. "Second, I want to be included in family events. Real inclusion, not just a token invitation where I'm ignored. And yes, that includes family photos." Vanessa had the grace to look ashamed. "Third, I want honesty between us from now on. No more secrets, no more pretending. If you have a problem with me, we talk about it directly." Michael reached for my hand. "That's more than fair, Mom. We agree to all of it." "There's one more thing," I added. "I want you both to volunteer at the senior center downtown, once a month for the next year." They exchanged confused glances. "The senior center?" Vanessa asked. "Yes. I want you to spend time with people my age, learn their stories, see their humanity beyond their wrinkles and gray hair. Understand that aging isn't something to be hidden away, it's something to be respected." It was a bold request, but one I felt necessary for all of us. After a moment, they agreed. The loan was approved the following week, with my signature alongside theirs. True to their word, they brought James every Wednesday, gradually extending those visits until I was a regular, cherished presence in his life. The volunteer work at the senior center, initially approached with reluctance, became something they genuinely valued, especially when Vanessa discovered that one of the residents had been a pioneering female marketing executive with connections still relevant to her career. As for the family photos, 6 months after our agreement, a large, professionally framed portrait appeared on that prominent wall in their living room. In it, 4 generations stood together. Vanessa's parents, Michael and Vanessa, baby James, and me, standing proudly in the center, wrinkles, gray hair, and all. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still times when old habits threatened to resurface. But we were trying, all of us, to build something authentic from the ruins of what had been broken. I learned something powerful through this journey. Sometimes being excluded is a blessing in disguise. It forces you to find your own value, apart from others' validation. And sometimes, the very things that make you unphotogenic in someone else's eyes, your age, your experience, your unwillingness to pretend, turn out to be your greatest strengths when the perfect facade finally cracks. The first few years after Thomas died were the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to find cold sheets and silence where his gentle snoring should have been. Michael, just 8 years old, would crawl into bed with me some mornings, his small hands patting my tear-stained cheeks. "It's okay, Mommy," he'd whisper. "We still have each other." Those words became my anchor in a storm of grief that threatened to pull me under. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and 3 months of mortgage payments. Thomas had always handled our finances, and I discovered too late that we had less savings than I'd thought. The elementary school principal was sympathetic but firm. My teaching salary alone wouldn't sustain us in the modest 3-bedroom home we'd bought with such pride just 2 years earlier. I took on tutoring after school hours, then weekend shifts at a local bookstore. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Some nights, I'd grade papers until 2 in the morning, only to rise again at 5 to prepare Michael's lunch and review my lesson plans. My colleagues noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way my clothes hung looser on my frame each month, but their concerned questions were met with reassuring smiles. "We're managing just fine," I'd say, even on days when the electricity bill went unpaid to cover Michael's asthma medication. What kept me going was Michael's resilience. Despite losing his father, despite moving to a smaller apartment in a different school district, despite wearing secondhand clothes and forgoing the video games his friends played, he remained remarkably uncomplaining. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics, and joined the chess club where participation was free. His teacher called him a bright light in her classroom, words that filled me with a fierce pride that overshadowed my exhaustion. By the time Michael entered middle school, our routine had stabilized. I'd been promoted to lead teacher with a modest raise, and our apartment, though small, felt like home with its shelves of books and walls covered in Michael's artwork and certificates of achievement. We had Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn, Sunday morning pancakes shaped like whatever Michael was studying in science class that week, and summer camping trips in the state park where entry fees were minimal. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in moments that mattered. The teenage years brought new challenges. Michael shot up 5 inches in one summer, outgrowing all his clothes at once. His feet seemed to expand overnight, and the cost of new shoes, every few months, strained our budget. But his academic success continued, and when his guidance counselor mentioned college scholarships, I felt a cautious hope bloom. Maybe, just maybe, he could have opportunities I'd never dreamed of for myself. It was during his junior year that Michael first mentioned wanting to attend Westridge University, a prestigious private college known for its business program. The tuition figures made my stomach clench, but I kept my expression neutral as he excitedly described their entrepreneurship track. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I pulled out our financial records and calculated exactly what it would take. Even with scholarships, even if he lived at home and commuted, the numbers were daunting. The next day, I applied for a home equity loan on our apartment and an additional teaching position at the community college's night school. My weekends were now spent proctoring standardized tests for extra income. Sleep became even more elusive, but whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I'd think of Michael in a cap and gown, accepting a diploma that would open doors I'd never been able to walk through. When the acceptance letter from Westridge arrived, Michael's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before Thomas died. We celebrated with a dinner at a real restaurant, a rare extravagance, and I took pictures of him holding the letter, his smile so wide it must have hurt his cheeks. "You did it," I told him, though what I meant was, we did it. Together. The 4 years of Michael's college education were a blur of work, penny pinching, and quiet sacrifice. I sold my mother's antique brooch to cover one semester's textbooks. I took on administrative duties at school during summer breaks when other teachers were vacationing. I learned to mend clothes, fix appliances, and stretch groceries in ways that would have impressed Depression-era housewives. But each time Michael called to excitedly share his latest business concept or marketing strategy, I knew it was worth every sacrifice. He graduated magna cum laude, the first in our family to earn a college degree. I sat in the audience, watching him cross that stage, and thought my heart might burst with pride. Thomas should have been there to see it, but I felt his presence in the gentle spring breeze that ruffled Michael's graduation gown. Later, at a small celebration in our apartment, Michael hugged me tightly and whispered, "This is for you, Mom. Everything I do from now on is because of you." Those words sustained me through the years that followed. Years when Michael moved to the city for his first corporate job, when our Sunday dinners became monthly phone calls, when holidays were sometimes spent apart due to his work schedule. It was the natural order of things, I told myself. I'd raised him to be independent, to chase opportunities. I couldn't now complain that he was doing exactly that. Still, there was a quiet ache in watching him build a life that increasingly had little space for me. I filled my days with teaching, with book clubs and community garden volunteering, with friendships among other empty nesters who understood this peculiar grief of success, of having done your job as a parent so well that you'd rendered yourself somewhat obsolete. When Michael called to say he'd met someone special, I felt a flutter of both excitement and trepidation. Vanessa Harrington was her name, and from the way his voice softened when he spoke it, I knew this was different from the casual relationships he'd mentioned in passing over the years. I spent hours preparing for our first meeting, choosing a dress that was modest but not matronly, practicing conversation topics that showed I was educated and engaged with the world. I wanted desperately for her to like me, to see me as someone worthy of being part of their shared life. Our initial lunch was at an upscale bistro where the menu didn't list prices, a warning sign I chose to ignore. Vanessa was striking, with the kind of beauty that comes from excellent genes enhanced by expensive maintenance. Her blonde hair fell in artful waves around a heart-shaped face, and her manicure probably cost more than my entire outfit. But she was polite, asking appropriate questions about my teaching career and complimenting the pendant I wore, a simple silver piece Thomas had given me on our 5th anniversary. "Michael tells me you raised him alone after his father passed," she said, delicately cutting her salad into precise bites. "That must have been incredibly difficult on a teacher's salary." "We managed," I replied, choosing not to elaborate on exactly how we'd managed. The nights I'd lain awake calculating which bill could be postponed, the Christmas gifts I'd wrapped for myself from Michael so he wouldn't feel his childhood lacked the proper rituals. Those stories weren't appropriate for a first meeting. "It's remarkable what single mothers accomplish," she continued, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "My mother stayed home with us, of course, but she always said teaching was a noble profession for women who needed to work." I nodded, swallowing both my food and the subtle condescension in her words. For Michael's sake, I focused on finding common ground, her interest in educational charities, her fondness for classic literature, her close relationship with her younger sister. By the end of the meal, we'd established a cordial rapport, if not the warm connection I'd hoped for. "She's lovely," I told Michael later, because that's what mothers are supposed to say about the women their sons love. "I can see why you're taken with her." His relief was palpable, even over the phone. "I knew you'd like her, Mom. She was nervous about meeting you, you know. She said you're a hard act to follow." I doubted those were her exact words, but the sentiment was nice enough that I let myself believe it. The engagement came 6 months later. Michael called on a Sunday evening, his voice trembling with excitement as he described the elaborate proposal he'd orchestrated. A private yacht dinner on the harbor, a photographer hidden to capture the moment, a diamond ring that had belonged to Vanessa's grandmother. She said, "Yes, Mom, we're getting married in June." "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I managed, though my mind was already racing ahead to practical concerns, what I could afford to contribute, what to wear, how to navigate the inevitable awkwardness of being the only parent among Vanessa's intact, affluent family. "Her parents want to host an engagement party next month," Michael continued. "Nothing too elaborate, just close family and friends at their country club. You'll come, won't you?" "Of course," I promised, already mentally inventorying my closet for something appropriate for a country club event. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The nothing too elaborate engagement party turned out to be a black tie affair for over 100 guests. I wore my best dress, a navy blue sheath I'd purchased for a colleague's retirement dinner 3 years earlier, and immediately felt underdressed among women in designer gowns dripping with jewelry that could have funded several years of Michael's college education. Catherine Harrington, Vanessa's mother, greeted me with air kisses and a quick once-over that took in every detail of my appearance and found it wanting. "Eleanor, how lovely you could make it. What a classic dress, so timeless." Timeless was clearly code for outdated, but I smiled and thanked her for the party. "Everything is beautiful. You and your husband must be so happy for Vanessa and Michael." "We are," she agreed, though something in her tone suggested reservations. Richard had hoped Vanessa might marry within our circle, of course. There was that lovely Carmichael boy she dated in college whose father owns half of downtown, but Michael seems very ambitious. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by the arrival of more guests, leaving me to navigate the room alone. I caught glimpses of Michael throughout the evening, moving easily among Vanessa's friends and family, looking somehow more polished than I remembered. His suit was clearly new and expertly tailored, his haircut more sophisticated than the simple style he'd worn through college. He looked happy, confident, at home in this world of wealth and status. It was during the champagne toast that I first noticed the subtle shift in how he presented our story. Richard Harrington, raising his glass to the couple, mentioned how impressed he was with Michael's business acumen and drive. Michael, responding, spoke of his challenging childhood and how it had motivated him to succeed. I knew from an early age that I wanted more, he said, as guests nodded appreciatively at this narrative of overcoming adversity. My mom did her best with what she had, but I was determined to build something greater. His words stung like a paper cut, shallow but surprisingly painful. Our life together hadn't been characterized by lack, at least not in the ways that mattered. We'd had books and music and laughter. We'd had love. When had that become a story? Of deprivation he'd needed to transcend? Later, when I finally had a moment alone with him, I mentioned it as gently as I could. I was surprised by how you described your childhood, Michael. It sounded so bleak. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Oh, Mom, you know how these things go. People love a good started from the bottom story. It's just networking talk. It doesn't mean anything. Except it did mean something. It meant he'd begun to see our life together through a different lens, one colored by Vanessa's world and values. It meant the narrative of our shared history was being rewritten to fit his new circumstances. You didn't start from the bottom, I said quietly. You had love and stability and opportunities that many children don't have. Michael squeezed my hand. I know that, Mom. I'm grateful for everything you did. Really. But you have to admit, compared to Vanessa's family, well, we didn't have much. We had enough, I insisted, but he was already being called away by his future father-in-law to meet some business associate, leaving me alone with my champagne and complicated feelings. The wedding planning took on a life of its own. Vanessa, I learned, had been envisioning her perfect day since childhood, and her parents were prepared to spare no expense to realize that vision. When Michael called to discuss dates, I tentatively raised the question of finances. I've been saving, I told him. It's not a lot, but I could contribute about $5,000 toward the wedding expenses. I know traditionally the bride's family pays, but, Mom, no, he interrupted. You don't need to do that. Catherine and Richard have it covered. They want to do this for Vanessa. His quick dismissal of my offer, while practical, felt like another small rejection, a message that my contributions, financial or otherwise, weren't necessary in this new chapter of his life. The next few months brought a flurry of wedding-related activities from which I was largely excluded. There were tastings and venue tours, floral consultations, and meetings with wedding planners. I learned about most of these events after they'd happened, through brief calls from Michael, or, more frequently, seeing photos on social media where Vanessa tagged her mother, sister, and bridesmaids. We didn't want to bother you with all these details, Michael explained when I mentioned feeling left out. You're so busy with teaching, and most of these appointments are during school hours anyway. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't soothe the growing sense that I was being deliberately kept at arm's length. This feeling crystallized when, 3 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from Vanessa with a short list of approved colors for mother-of-the-groom attire. We're going for a very specific aesthetic, she wrote. The photographer has emphasized how important it is for everyone to coordinate with our palette. Please send me photos of your potential outfit before purchasing. I stared at the screen, torn between indignation and insecurity. On one hand, it seemed absurdly controlling to dictate what a mother should wear to her own son's wedding. On the other hand, I was painfully aware of how out of place I already felt among Vanessa's family and friends. The last thing I wanted was to embarrass Michael by looking inappropriate. In the end, I spent far more than I could afford on a pale, sage dress that perfectly matched Vanessa's approved palette, sent her photos for approval, which came back with a terse, "This will work." and tried to focus on the joy of seeing my son marry, rather than the sting of being treated like a potential liability. The wedding day itself was a blur of activity and emotions. I arrived at the venue, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens, early as instructed in my detailed itinerary. The bridal party had a dedicated wing for preparations, while the groomsmen were gathered in a separate building. I hovered uncertainly in the main hall until a harried wedding planner directed me to a small anteroom where I could wait comfortably until the ceremony. Through the partially open door of the bridal suite, I could see flashes of activity: hairstylists wielding curling irons, makeup artists applying false eyelashes, bridesmaids in matching silk robes sipping champagne. Catherine was in the midst of it all, adjusting Vanessa's veil with the proud authority of a general overseeing troops. No one noticed me standing there, or if they did, no one thought to invite me in. I retreated to the anteroom and sat alone, feeling increasingly invisible. This was my son's wedding day, a milestone I'd dreamed of sharing with him since he was small. Yet here I was, isolated from the preparations, the photos, the intimate moments that precede such a significant life event. When I finally saw Michael, handsome in his tuxedo as he prepared to take his place at the altar, my heart swelled with a complicated mixture of pride and loss. He kissed my cheek hurriedly, his mind clearly elsewhere. "You look nice, Mom. Is that a new dress?" "Yes," I replied, touched that he'd noticed. "I wanted to look special for your big day." "It's perfect," he said, though his eyes were already scanning the gathering guests, the decorations, the overall scene. "I should go check on some things before the ceremony starts. The ushers will show you to your seat." And just like that, he was gone, swept into the carefully choreographed pageant that was his wedding day, a production in which I had been cast as little more than an extra. The ceremony was objectively beautiful: masses of white flowers, a string quartet playing classical selections, Vanessa floating down the aisle in a custom gown that probably cost more than a year of my salary. I sat in the front row, alone, in a sea of Harrington relatives, and watched my son pledge himself to a woman who had already begun to reshape him in her image. At the reception, I was seated at a table with distant Harrington cousins and an elderly great-aunt who was hard of hearing. My table was positioned far from the head table where Michael sat with Vanessa, her parents, and her sister. I made polite conversation, danced one obligatory dance with my son, and slipped away early when it became clear that my presence or absence would make little difference to the celebration. In the weeks that followed, I saw the professional wedding photos appear on social media, hundreds of perfectly composed images documenting every moment of the day. I appeared in exactly 3. One formal shot of Michael with his mother, one group photo of all guests, and one candid moment where I was visible in the background as Michael danced with Catherine. My congratulatory comment on the album received a thumbs up from Vanessa but no response from Michael. The newlyweds honeymooned in Bali for 2 weeks, then moved into a luxury condo purchased with help from the Harringtons. Our Sunday dinners, once sacred tradition when Michael lived in the city, became increasingly rare. When I called to suggest dates, there were always reasons they couldn't make it: work commitments, social obligations with Vanessa's friends, renovation projects in the condo. "We're just so busy getting settled," Michael explained. "Once things calm down, we'll have you over. Promise." I filled my suddenly emptier life with new activities: joining a hiking club, volunteering at the local literacy center, taking a pottery class I'd always been curious about. If my son was moving forward with his new life, I needed to do the same. Still, I kept my schedule flexible, ready to rearrange plans whenever Michael suggested a visit or meal together. 3 months after the wedding, I was finally invited to their condo for dinner. I brought a homemade apple pie, Michael's childhood favorite, and a small housewarming gift, a handcrafted ceramic vase from a local artist. Vanessa greeted me with a cool cheek kiss and immediately took the pie to the kitchen, returning without it. "We're trying to cut back on refined sugar," she explained. "But thank you for the thought." The condo was a showcase of modern minimalism. White walls, sleek furniture, strategic pops of color in expensive-looking art pieces. Not a single personal photo was displayed. No evidence of Michael's childhood or college years. No visual representation of his life before Vanessa. It was as if his history had been erased, replaced by an aesthetic so perfect it felt sterile. Dinner was a stilted affair. Vanessa served something quinoa-based that Michael pretended to enjoy, but barely ate. The conversation centered mostly on their social calendar, charity galas with the Harringtons, weekend getaways with Vanessa's college friends, an upcoming golf retreat with Michael's new colleagues. I listened and nodded, searching for an opening to connect with my son, to find the person I'd raised beneath this polished exterior. "How's the teaching going, Mom?" Michael finally asked as Vanessa cleared the plates. "Still enjoying the fifth graders?" I brightened at his interest. "They're wonderful this year. We're doing a special project on local history, interviewing senior citizens, and creating a community archive. The children are so engaged, and it's building such beautiful intergenerational connections." "That sounds time-consuming," Vanessa commented, returning with tiny cups of espresso. "When do you think you'll consider retirement, Eleanor? Surely you've put in enough years by now." The question caught me off guard. I was 61, with at least 4 more years before full retirement benefits. "I'm not ready yet. I still love teaching, and frankly, I need the income and health insurance." A loaded glance passed between them. "We've been thinking," Michael began carefully, "that it might be good for you to consider your next chapter. You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it's time to relax a little." What he didn't say, but what I understood perfectly, was that my continuing to work as a public school teacher didn't fit with the image they were cultivating. Successful young professionals from good families didn't typically have mothers, still teaching elementary school out of financial necessity. Retirement would be a more suitable narrative, even if it wasn't economically feasible for me. "I'll consider it when the time is right," I said gently, unwilling to have my financial realities become a source of tension. "But for now, my students need me, and I need them." The evening ended early. As I gathered my coat, I noticed my ceramic vase had been placed on a side table near the entry, not displayed in the main living space, but not quite hidden away either. A small concession, perhaps, to my presence in their lives. "This was lovely," I said, hugging Michael goodbye. "Next time you must come to my place. I'll make that lasagna you used to request for your birthday." "That sounds great, Mom," he replied, though we both knew it wouldn't happen anytime soon. "We'll check our calendar and let you know." Driving home to my modest apartment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was happening. My son, whom I'd raised with such sacrifice and love, was deliberately distancing himself from me, from his upbringing, from everything that didn't align with the life he was now constructing. It wasn't malicious. He wasn't a cruel person. But it was happening nonetheless. A slow erosion of our connection that felt like losing him all over again, in a different way than I'd feared when he was a child without a father. That night, I pulled out old photo albums, pictures of Michael's first steps, his kindergarten graduation, fishing trips with Thomas before he died, the two of us making snow angels during a rare winter storm. I traced his smiling face with my finger, remembering the feel of his small hand in mine, the weight of him asleep against my shoulder, the sound of his laughter echoing through our tiny apartment. Where had that boy gone? Was he still somewhere inside the polished stranger who now bore my son's name? In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I allowed myself to cry for what felt like the first time in years, not just for the growing distance between us, but for the realization that my greatest achievement, raising a kind and grounded son, was being reimagined as something to overcome rather than celebrate. The life we'd built together, with all its love and struggle and joy, was being rewritten as a hardship narrative to explain his ambition, rather than honored as the foundation that had made his success possible. Morning brought clarity, and with it, resolve. I couldn't control how Michael chose to view our shared past or integrate me into his new life, but I could control how I responded to it. I would not beg for inclusion or apologize for who I was. I would not shrink myself to fit into the narrow space they seemed willing to allocate for me. I would continue living with purpose and dignity, keeping the door open should Michael ever choose to walk through it authentically, but no longer waiting by that door at the expense of my own well-being. I called an old colleague who had been asking me to join her book club for months. I signed up for a weekend workshop on digital storytelling at the community college. I finally said yes to coffee with Martin, the kind widower from my apartment building who had been leaving friendly notes under my door for nearly a year. Life would go on, with or without Michael's regular presence in it. And perhaps someday, when the shine of his new existence had dulled somewhat, he would remember the substance of what we'd shared and find his way back to a more honest relationship with both his past and me. The invitation to Vanessa's baby shower arrived on a Tuesday morning, an elaborate cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. Inside, the cardstock was thick and textured, announcing a celestial celebration to welcome baby boy Mitchell at the Harrington family estate. The date was 3 weeks away, and an RSVP was requested to Catherine Harrington's personal assistant. At the bottom, a handwritten note in what I recognized as Michael's handwriting. "Hope you can make it, Mom. Hope you can make it." As if my attendance at the celebration of my first grandchild was optional, an afterthought. I ran my fingers over the embossed stars and moons decorating the invitation's border and tried to quell the hurt rising in my chest. This should have been a moment of pure joy, the prospect of becoming a grandmother, of witnessing the next generation of our small family take shape. Instead, it felt like another reminder of my peripheral status in Michael and Vanessa's carefully curated world. I called Michael that evening, hoping to hear excitement in his voice, to share in the anticipation of this new life we would both love. "Mom, hi," he answered, slightly breathless. "Can I call you back? We're just heading out to meet the interior designer for the nursery." "Of course," I said quickly. "I just wanted to say I got the baby shower invitation. It looks lovely." "Great. Vanessa's mom is going all out. It's going to be quite an event." I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I was hoping we might have lunch soon, just the two of us. I have some things for the baby, books I saved from when you were little, a quilt I've been working on. Nothing fancy, but sentimental." There was a pause, the muffled sound of him covering the phone to speak to someone. Vanessa, presumably. Then, he was back. "That would be nice, Mom. Things are crazy right now with work and all the baby preparations, but I'll check my calendar and text you some options, okay?" "Perfect," I replied, though we both knew those options might never materialize. Give my best to Vanessa. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the cedar chest where I'd stored Michael's childhood treasures. The hand-knit baby blanket my mother had made for him, the collection of well-worn board books he'd memorized before he could, read, the tiny blue hat he'd worn home from the hospital. These precious artifacts of his beginnings suddenly seemed quaint and inadequate compared to the designer nursery being planned for his son. The lunch never happened. Michael texted a few days later with vague apologies about his schedule, promising to make it up to me once things settle down. Instead, I carefully wrapped each item I'd saved, adding the lap quilt I'd spent months stitching in soft blues and greens, and sent the package to their home with a note expressing my love and excitement about the baby. A week later, I received a text from Vanessa, not Michael, thanking me for the vintage items that would be perfect for the nostalgic corner of the nursery. Vintage items. As if these treasures that had been part of Michael's first days were merely decorative props to be arranged for aesthetic effect rather than meaningful connections to his history, to our shared past. I wondered if my grandson would ever know the stories behind these objects, how Michael had insisted on reading Goodnight Moon every night for a year, pointing at the page and reciting the words from memory, How he'd slept with that blue knit hat well past infancy, clutching it like a security blanket. How his own father had bought him that wooden train set for his third Christmas, just months before his sudden death. The day of the baby shower arrived, with perfect early summer weather. Bright sunshine, a gentle breeze, temperatures mild enough for the outdoor celebration planned at the Harrington estate. I had spent considerable time choosing my outfit, wanting to look appropriate for what was clearly going to be an upscale event. I settled on a floral dress in muted blues that complemented my silver hair, added my mother's pearl earrings, and splurged on a professional blowout at the salon near my apartment. The Harrington estate was even more impressive than I had imagined. A sprawling property with manicured gardens, a circular driveway lined with luxury vehicles, and the kind of imposing facade that suggested old money and established social position. I parked my 12-year-old sedan self-consciously between a Mercedes and a Range Rover, checking my lipstick in the rearview mirror before gathering the gift I'd brought. A sterling silver music box I'd found at an antique store, far more expensive than I could afford, but something I hoped would be deemed acceptable in this setting. A uniformed server greeted guests at the entrance, directing us through the grand foyer and out to the gardens where the shower was being held. The theme had been executed with characteristic Harrington extravagance. Midnight blue draperies, dotted with twinkling lights, created the illusion of a starry sky over the patio, tables adorned with celestial centerpieces, a string quartet playing softly in the background. Women in designer sundresses clustered in conversational groups, champagne flutes in hand, while caterers circulated with trays of elegant hors d'oeuvres. I recognized a few faces from the wedding. Vanessa's sister, some cousins, Catherine holding court near the elaborate gift table. Of Michael there was no sign. I later learned that while some progressive fathers-to-be might attend baby showers, this particular event was designated as ladies only, a detail not mentioned on the invitation. "Eleanor, you made it," Catherine approached, air-kissing my cheeks. "Let me show you to your table." She led me to a table positioned at the furthest edge of the patio, where I was seated with Vanessa's elderly great-aunt Mildred, who was mostly deaf, a cousin who had apparently been invited out of obligation and spent the entire event checking her phone, and two of Catherine's neighbors who had never met Michael and spent most of the time discussing their country club's tennis tournament. Throughout the carefully orchestrated event, the catered lunch, the curated games, the ceremonial opening of gifts, I watched Vanessa from afar. She was radiant in a custom-made maternity dress, her pregnancy enhancing rather than diminishing her beauty. She moved confidently among her mother's friends and her own contemporaries, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced grace. Occasionally her hand would rest protectively on her swollen belly, and I would feel a pang of longing to share in that intimate connection to my grandchild. When it came time for gifts, Catherine orchestrated the proceedings like a theater director, arranging Vanessa in an ornate chair draped with blue silk, positioning her sister nearby to record gifts and givers for thank-you notes, selecting which packages would be opened publicly and which would be set aside for later. My silver music box was in the latter category, placed on a side table with other gifts deemed not quite spectacular enough for the showcase. I watched as Vanessa unwrapped extravagant presents, a crystal baby rattle from Tiffany, a complete nursery bedding set from a French boutique, a hand-painted growth chart commissioned from a well-known children's illustrator. Each gift was more lavish than the last, each giver more effusive about their personal connection to Vanessa or her mother. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly out of place, wondering if my carefully chosen music box would be appreciated at all, or simply regarded as another vintage item of questionable taste. After the gifts, Catherine announced it was time for words of wisdom for the mother-to-be. Various women stood to offer advice. Vanessa's godmother spoke about the importance of maintaining one's identity beyond motherhood. Her sister shared humorous warnings about sleep deprivation. Her college roommate assured her that baby weight could indeed be lost with the right trainer. When all the designated speakers had finished, Catherine looked around the gathering. Would anyone else like to share some motherly wisdom with our Vanessa? Several heads turned in my direction. After all, I was the only mother of the father to be present, the only grandparent who had raised Michael from infancy. Surely I had insights to offer. I felt a sudden flush of self-consciousness, aware of all eyes on me, aware too of Vanessa's carefully neutral expression that suggested she was bracing herself for whatever embarrassing, old-fashioned advice I might inflict on her sophisticated celebration. I stood, smoothing my dress, and spoke from the heart. "The most important thing I learned as a mother," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "is that love multiplies rather than divides. You think you couldn't possibly love anyone as much as you love your husband, but then this tiny person arrives, and suddenly your heart expands in ways you never imagined possible." I paused, looking directly at Vanessa. "That little boy you're carrying will teach you more about yourself than any other relationship in your life. He'll challenge you, surprise you, and reveal depths of strength you didn't know you possessed. It's the hardest job you'll ever love." For a moment, something genuine flickered across Vanessa's face. A recognition, perhaps, of the universal truth in what I was saying. A brief connection across the chasm of our differences. But then Catherine smoothly interjected with a comment about the cake being served, and the moment was gone, swallowed up in the continuing pageantry of the event. As the shower wound down, I found myself standing alone near the gift table, wondering if I should make an effort to speak privately with Vanessa before leaving. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, laughing at something on someone's phone, seeming younger and more relaxed than I had seen her in months. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude on her moment of genuine enjoyment, and in that hesitation, I overheard Catherine speaking to another guest just around the corner. "Eleanor seems nice enough, but between us, Michael has had to work so hard to overcome that background. You know, they lived in that dreadful apartment complex off Highway 9, the one near the discount mall? Can you imagine?" The other woman made a sympathetic noise, and Catherine continued. "Vanessa's been so patient about including her, but frankly, there's only so much you can do with someone of that generation and background. And now with the baby coming, well, we'll have to see how much influence is appropriate." My cheeks burned with humiliation. The dreadful apartment complex had been our home for 15 years, the place where I'd nursed Michael through chickenpox and teenage heartbreaks, where we'd celebrated his college acceptance, where I'd scraped together enough to provide him a stable life after his father died. To hear it dismissed so cavalierly, to hear my very presence in my grandchild's life discussed as something to be managed and minimized, cut deeper than I could have anticipated. I gathered my purse and slipped away without saying goodbye, the festive sounds of the shower fading behind me as I made my way to my car. Tears threatened, but I held them back, unwilling to arrive home with mascara streaking my cheeks, with evidence of how deeply I'd been wounded. Instead, I drove to the park where I'd often taken Michael as a child, a simple place with towering oak trees and a duck pond that had fascinated him for hours. I sat on a familiar bench and finally allowed myself to cry, mourning not just my exclusion from this celebration, but the gradual erosion of my place in my son's life. When I returned home, there was a text from Michael asking if I'd enjoyed the shower. "It was lovely," I replied, because what else could I say? What purpose would it serve to tell him how isolated I'd felt, how his mother-in-law had spoken about me, how even my gift had been deemed unworthy of public acknowledgement? He was happy, excited about his child, building a life that he clearly valued. My hurt feelings seemed small and selfish in comparison. "Great," he texted back. "Vanessa was really glad you could make it. We'll get together soon, promise." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into end-of-year activities at school, fifth-grade graduation preparations, faculty meetings to discuss next year's curriculum, clearing out my classroom for summer cleaning. The familiar rhythms of academic life were comforting, giving structure to days that might otherwise have been filled with rumination about my diminishing role in Michael's world. My students, as always, provided perspective. Their enthusiasm, their challenges, their growth reminding me daily of why I had chosen teaching as my life's work. One evening in early August, my phone rang with Michael's number. My heart leapt. Perhaps this was the invitation to lunch we'd discussed, or news about the baby, or simply a desire to reconnect before the birth consumed all his attention. "Mom." His voice was tense, controlled. "The baby's coming early. We're at Memorial Hospital. Vanessa's in labor." "I'll be right there," I said immediately, already reaching for my keys. "Is everything okay? Is Vanessa all right?" "The doctors say it's fine. He's only 3 weeks early, which isn't a concern. But could you wait until tomorrow to come? Catherine and Richard are here, and Vanessa's sister, and she's feeling overwhelmed with everyone around. Maybe visit during regular hours tomorrow?" I froze, keys in hand, the implied message clear. I was not considered immediate family in this crisis, not someone whose presence was essential or comforting. I was an afterthought, someone to be accommodated after the fact, once the important people had their time. "Of course," I managed, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Just let me know when would be convenient. And Michael, I'm so happy for you both. This is a beautiful day." "Thanks, Mom. I'll text you tomorrow with updates." I spent that night sleepless, checking my phone hourly for news, imagining the scene at the hospital. Vanessa surrounded by her family, Michael navigating his new role as father, the Harringtons, establishing themselves as the primary grandparents from the very first moments. When would I meet my grandson? Would there be any moments left for me? Any opportunity to establish a relationship untainted by the dynamics that had come to define my interactions with Michael and Vanessa? The text came at dawn. James Thomas Mitchell, born 4:17 a.m. 6 lbs 8 Oz. Mom and baby doing well. Visit after 2 p.m. today. James Thomas. They had given him Thomas's name, my husband's name. I hadn't known they were considering it, hadn't been consulted or informed. The gesture brought fresh tears to my eyes, a complex mixture of gratitude that they had honored Michael's father, and hurt that I had been excluded from this decision, from the discussions and considerations that must have preceded it. I arrived at the hospital at precisely 2 p.m., bearing a small stuffed rabbit I'd found at a local toy shop and a bouquet of blue hydrangeas. The maternity floor was quiet, and a nurse directed me to room 307 with a warm smile. I knocked softly before entering, not wanting to wake Vanessa or the baby if they were resting. The scene that greeted me was both beautiful and painful. Vanessa was propped up in bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who had given birth hours earlier. Her hair was neatly brushed, her face subtly made up, a silk robe replacing the standard hospital gown. Catherine sat beside her, holding a tiny blue-blanketed bundle, cooing softly. Richard and Michael stood near the window, deep in conversation. The room was already filled with elaborate flower arrangements, gift baskets, and mylar balloons. "Eleanor," Vanessa acknowledged me first, her voice tired but polite. "You came." "Of course," I said, stepping forward to place my modest offerings on a side table already crowded with more impressive gifts. "Congratulations to you both. I can't wait to meet James." Catherine looked up, reluctantly relinquishing the baby, to Michael, who brought him to me with a proud, exhausted smile. "Mom, meet your grandson." And there he was, tiny, perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like Michael's had been, with the same bow-shaped mouth that I remembered from those first precious days in the hospital 34 years ago. As Michael carefully transferred him to my arms, I felt a surge of love so powerful it momentarily erased all the hurts and disappointments of the past months. This was my grandson, my blood, a miracle that connected past and future in one small, breathing bundle. "Hello, James," I whispered, tracing one finger along his velvet cheek. "I'm your grandma. I've been waiting such a long time to meet you." For a few perfect minutes, I held him close, memorizing his features, inhaling the indescribable scent of newborn that brought back a flood of memories from Michael's infancy. It didn't matter in that moment that Catherine was watching with barely concealed impatience, or that Vanessa was exchanging glances with her mother, or that my time with James would be brief compared to the access the Harringtons would enjoy. For these few minutes, I was connected to my grandson, establishing the beginning of what I hoped would be a lasting bond. All too soon, a nurse arrived to check Vanessa's vitals, and Catherine smoothly suggested it might be time for James to return to his mother. I reluctantly handed him back, my arms feeling suddenly empty and cold. "He's absolutely beautiful," I told Michael and Vanessa sincerely. "You've created a miracle." "Thank you," Vanessa said, and for once, there seemed to be genuine warmth in her smile. Perhaps the transformative experience of birth had softened her, or perhaps in the vulnerable state of new motherhood, she was more open to connection with another woman who had traveled this path. Whatever the reason, I treasured that small moment of authentic exchange. "We used Dad's name," Michael said unnecessarily. "I hope that's okay." "It's more than okay," I assured him. "Your father would have been so proud and honored. It's a perfect choice." I stayed for another 20 minutes, making appropriate conversation, admiring James from a distance as he nursed and then slept in Vanessa's arms. When Richard mentioned that other visitors were expected soon, Vanessa's godparents apparently, I took the cue and gathered my things to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow," I promised. "If that's convenient?" "Actually," Catherine interjected smoothly, "we're hoping to keep visitors limited for the next few days. The pediatrician recommends minimal exposure for newborns, and Vanessa needs her rest." I looked to Michael for confirmation or contradiction, but he merely nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe next weekend would be better, Mom, once they're home and settled." "Of course," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "Whatever's best for Vanessa and James, just let me know when you're ready for visitors." The "when you're ready" stretched from days into weeks. I received occasional photos of James via text, formal, posed images that showed a growing, changing baby, but revealed little about his developing personality or daily life. When I suggested visiting, there were always reasons to delay. Vanessa was dealing with breastfeeding challenges. James was fussy with colic. They were adjusting to the night wakings and needed space. Finally, 6 weeks after James's birth, I was invited to their home on a Sunday afternoon. I arrived bearing more gifts, clothes in the next size up, a collection of children's books I'd carefully selected, a small photo album I'd started with, pictures of Michael as a baby alongside spaces for photos of James at the same ages. I was excited to finally hold my grandson again, to see how he'd grown, to perhaps establish a regular pattern of visits now that the newborn period was behind them. The house was immaculate, showing no signs of the typical chaos that accompanies life with a newborn. Vanessa greeted me looking remarkably well-rested and put together, wearing an outfit that suggested her pre-pregnancy figure had already been fully restored. James was asleep in what Vanessa described as his second nursery, a beautifully appointed room on the main floor designed to complement the primary nursery upstairs. "We don't want to disturb him," she explained when I asked if I could see him. "He's been fussy all morning and finally settled. Michael's upstairs catching up on some sleep too. He was up with James most of the night." So I sat in their pristine living room, making polite conversation with Vanessa about her recovery, listening to detailed explanations of James's feeding, schedule and sleep training regimen, admiring photos on her phone rather than the actual baby I'd come to see. Just as my disappointment was becoming difficult to mask, a cry emanated from the nursery. "I'll get him," I offered quickly, grateful for any chance to interact with my grandson. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but please don't pick him up right away. We're trying to teach him to self-soothe. Just check if he's truly awake or just transitioning between sleep cycles. I entered the nursery, a marvel of designer elegance with its celestial theme carried through in hand-painted constellations on navy walls, a crystal mobile spinning gently above a custom crib. James was indeed awake, his tiny face red with effort, as he worked up to a full cry. I waited as instructed, watching him flail his small fists in frustration, every instinct urging me to lift and comfort him. When his cries intensified, I finally picked him up, cradling him against my shoulder, as I had done countless times with Michael. "Hello, sweet boy," I murmured, patting his back gently. "Grandma's here now. Everything's all right." He continued to cry, his little body tense with discomfort or hunger or simple newborn distress. I walked slowly around the room, swaying slightly, using the soothing techniques that had worked with Michael decades ago. Gradually, his cries subsided, and he hiccuped against my neck, his weight warm and solid in my arms. "What are you doing?" Vanessa stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of alarm and disapproval. "I told you not to pick him up right away. Now you've interrupted his self-soothing practice." "He was quite upset," I explained, still patting. "James is back. I thought—" "We're following a very specific sleep training method," she interrupted, moving toward me with outstretched arms. "The pediatrician recommended it. Consistency is crucial at this stage." Reluctantly, I handed James to his mother, immediately missing the weight and warmth of him against my chest. Vanessa efficiently checked his diaper, declared it dry, and placed him back in the crib, ignoring his renewed fussing. "He'll settle himself in a few minutes," she said confidently, ushering me out of the nursery. "It's important not to create sleep associations that will be problematic later." In the living room, James's cries filtered through the baby monitor, each one feeling like a small accusation. Michael appeared, hair rumpled from sleep, just as the crying reached a crescendo. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. "Is James okay?" "Your mother picked him up before he could self-soothe," Vanessa explained, an edge to her voice. "Now he's working through it again." Michael frowned slightly. "Mom, we're trying to be consistent with his routine. The sleep consultant said—" "Sleep consultant?" I couldn't help interrupting. "He's only 6 weeks old, Michael." "It's a developmental approach," Vanessa said defensively. "Establishing healthy sleep habits from the beginning prevents problems down the road. Catherine used it with both me and my sister, and we were sleeping through the night by 8 weeks. I bit back the response that rose to my lips, that babies weren't meant to sleep through the night at 8 weeks, that responding to their cries built trust and security, that these precious early months passed so quickly. It wasn't my place to criticize their parenting choices, no matter how much they differed from my own approach. James was their child, not mine, and alienating them would only further restrict my already limited access to him. "I'm sorry if I interfered," I said instead. "I didn't understand how important the routine was to you." The tension eased somewhat, though James's cries continued from the nursery. After an uncomfortable few minutes, Michael excused himself to check on the baby, returning shortly with a still fussing James. Watching my son awkwardly try to comfort his son while adhering to some expert-prescribed methodology, I felt a deep sadness for what both of them were missing, the intuitive, responsive connection that had been the foundation of my relationship with Michael. The visit continued uncomfortably, with James passed between his parents, but not offered to me again. When I finally left, promising to respect their routines during future visits, I sat in my car for several minutes before driving away, processing the gulf between my vision of grandmotherhood and the restricted, conditional role I was being permitted to occupy in James's life. That night, I pulled out old photo albums again, seeking comfort in memories of Michael's babyhood. The unstructured, imperfect, love-filled days when I had followed my instincts rather than experts, when his cries had been answered with prompt comfort, when the foundation of our bond had been established through countless small moments of attunement and response. I wondered if James would ever know that kind of unconditional presence, or if his life would always be shaped by schedules and methodologies and carefully managed aesthetics. I wondered, too, how to maintain my connection to my grandson without overstepping the increasingly rigid boundaries Vanessa and Michael were establishing. How could I be authentic, the grandmother I wanted to be, the grandmother I believed James needed, while respecting their authority as parents? Was there any space in their perfectly arranged world for my more intuitive, emotion-centered approach to family relationships? These questions had no easy answers, and as I finally closed the photo albums and prepared for bed, I realized I was entering yet another phase of maternal adaptation, learning to love from a distance, to offer without imposing, to remain present, without overstepping. It was perhaps the most difficult balancing act I had yet attempted in my journey as a mother and now a grandmother. 6 months passed in a blur of occasional visits, carefully scheduled around James's nap times and feeding routines. Each time I arrived at Michael and Vanessa's home, I brought small gifts for my grandson: soft toys, picture books, seasonally appropriate clothes, which were accepted with polite thanks before disappearing into the labyrinth of his overstocked nursery, likely never to be seen again. I treasured the brief interactions I was permitted, watching him learn to sit up, hearing his first babbling sounds, witnessing the focus in his eyes as he reached for colorful objects. But these moments were always supervised, always time-limited, always conducted under Vanessa's watchful gaze. If I held him incorrectly, or spoke to him in a voice she deemed too stimulating, or suggested a different way to soothe his teething discomfort, I was quickly corrected. Michael, when present for these visits, largely deferred to his wife's parenting decisions, occasionally shooting me apologetic glances, but never openly contradicting her. "We need to be consistent," became Vanessa's mantra, repeated whenever I inadvertently violated one of their numerous childcare rules. The pediatrician says consistency is key. I learned to bite my tongue, to follow their protocols, to ask permission before picking up my own grandson. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but the alternative, being excluded entirely, was unthinkable. So I played by their rules, hoping that as James grew older, as his personality emerged, some natural bond between us might develop despite the constraints. When James turned 1, Catherine organized an elaborate birthday celebration at the Harrington estate. The invitation specified family only, which initially gave me hope for a more intimate gathering. Upon arrival, however, I discovered that family included Vanessa's extended clan: aunts, uncles, cousins, her maternal grandparents, alongside Catherine's circle of closest friends who had been deemed honorary family. I was the sole representative. From Michael's side, a fact that no one acknowledged but everyone seemed to notice. The party was themed around James's apparent fascination with animals, though having spent so little time with him, I couldn't have identified this interest myself. The gardens had been transformed into a tasteful safari landscape, with professional entertainers dressed as various wildlife handlers, a photographer documenting every moment, and a 3-tiered cake shaped like a stack of illustrated animal encyclopedias. A nod to James's advanced cognitive development, as Vanessa proudly informed several guests. I waited patiently for my turn to greet the birthday boy, who was being passed from one Harrington relative to another like a precious heirloom. When I finally approached, James regarded me with the polite curiosity he might offer any kindly stranger, showing no recognition despite my regular visits. It shouldn't have hurt. He saw me infrequently, always in the context of many other adults vying for his attention, but the absence of any special connection between us felt like a personal failure. "Would you like to see what Grandma brought?" "You?" I asked, kneeling to his level and presenting the wrapped package I'd spent weeks selecting. a handcrafted wooden puzzle featuring woodland animals, made by a local artisan, educational yet beautiful. James looked to his mother for guidance. Vanessa nodded her permission, and he dutifully took the package, immediately distracted by the ribbon rather than what might lie inside. "That's very nice of Grandma Eleanor," Vanessa prompted him, using the formal name they had decided I would be called, distinguishing me from Grandma Catherine, who required no such qualifier. "Say thank you to Grandma Eleanor," Michael added, his tone suggesting this was part of James's ongoing lessons in proper social behavior, rather than a genuine expression of gratitude. "Thank you," James mumbled, already turning away, the package, forgotten in the excitement of seeing another arriving guest, Catherine's sister, apparently a more familiar and welcome presence in his life. Later, during the ceremonial opening of gifts, my puzzle was unwrapped alongside dozens of other presents, most far more elaborate and expensive. Catherine narrated each gift for the assembled guests, identifying givers and highlighting particularly impressive offerings. When James's tiny hands finally revealed my puzzle, Catherine paused, clearly trying to find something positive to say about this simple wooden toy amid the electronic learning systems and designer outfits that had preceded it. "A lovely, traditional puzzle from Grandma Eleanor," she finally managed, before quickly moving on to the next gift, a child-sized electric car that immediately captured everyone's attention. After the presents, cake, and various entertainments, guests began to disperse. I remained, hoping for a few minutes of less structured time with James now that the formal activities had concluded. I found him in a quiet corner of the garden, surprisingly alone for once, examining a ladybug crawling along the edge of a planter. "That's a ladybug," I said softly, crouching beside him. "See her red wings with little black spots?" He looked up at me, his expression suddenly open and curious in a way it hadn't been during the orchestrated party activities. "Bug," he agreed solemnly. "Ladybugs are good insects," I continued, encouraged by his interest. "They help plants by eating the tiny bugs that would hurt them." "Help plants," he repeated, watching the ladybug's progress with intense concentration. For a precious few minutes, we existed in a bubble of genuine connection, just a grandmother sharing the world with her grandson, no protocols or schedules interrupting the natural flow of discovery. I pointed out the ladybug's antennae, counted its spots, showed him how gently to let it crawl onto his finger. His delighted giggle when the insect's tiny feet tickled his skin was the most authentic sound I'd heard all day. "What are you showing? Him?" Vanessa's voice cut through our moment. She approached quickly, concern etched on her face. "Is that an insect?" "James, come here, sweetheart. We don't play with bugs." "It's just a ladybug," I explained, trying to keep my tone light. Perfectly harmless. We were having a little science lesson. "We're very careful about his interactions with outdoor elements," Vanessa said, already wiping James's hands with a sanitizing cloth she'd pulled from her purse. "There are all sorts of bacteria and potential allergens. If you want to teach him about insects, there's a lovely illustrated book in the house, much more hygienic." And just like that, our moment was gone, replaced by Vanessa's anxiety and need for control. James was whisked away for a diaper change, and by the time they returned, Catherine was summoning everyone for a final family photo, a photo that, I noticed with a familiar pang, included her sister and brother-in-law, but not me. I left the party shortly after, driving home with a heaviness in my chest that had become all too familiar. The wooden puzzle I'd so carefully selected would likely be relegated to a closet, deemed too simple or too traditional compared to the electronic educational toys the Harringtons favored. The moment of connection I'd shared with James over the ladybug would be overshadowed by Vanessa's concern about germs and proper protocols. Once again, I had failed to find my place in my grandson's life, had failed to establish myself as someone significant amid the crowd of Harrington relatives and friends who saw him so much more frequently. Months passed with the same pattern of restricted, supervised visits. James's vocabulary exploded, then his mobility, then his imagination. Each developmental leap documented in the carefully curated photos Vanessa shared on social media, but which I experienced only in brief, controlled glimpses. I continued showing up, bringing small gifts, adhering to their rules, grateful for whatever access I was permitted while mourning what might have been under different circumstances. Then, shortly after James turned 2, an unexpected crisis shifted the familiar dynamic. Michael called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tense in a way I hadn't heard since his father died. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but we're in a bind. James's nanny quit without notice. Something about a family emergency back in the Philippines. Vanessa has that charity gala she's been organizing for months, and I've got this critical presentation at work tomorrow that could determine my whole future with the company." I held my breath, hardly daring to hope. Catherine would normally step in, but she and Richard are in Europe for another week. "Is there any chance at all, that you could come stay with James tomorrow? Just from about 8 in the morning until 6 or 7 in the evening? We've got another nanny lined up to start next week, but tomorrow." "Of course I can," I said immediately, almost cutting him off in my eagerness. "I'd be happy to spend the day with James." "There's a detailed schedule on the refrigerator," Michael continued, relief evident in his voice. "And emergency contacts, his pediatrician's number, his allergies. He's sensitive to strawberries, did you know that? And instructions for his meals and nap. Vanessa will go over everything when you arrive." "I raised a child before, Michael," I reminded him gently. "I think I can handle one day with my grandson." There was a pause, then a small chuckle that sounded more like the son I remembered. "Right. Sorry, Mom. We're very particular about his routine. And I'll follow it," I promised, already mentally rearranging my schedule to clear the entire day. "Don't worry about a thing." I arrived at their house at precisely 7:45 the next morning, dressed comfortably but neatly, prepared for a day of toddler activities. Vanessa greeted me at the door, already immaculate in a tailored suit despite the early hour. She ushered me into the kitchen where a multi-page document was laid out on the counter. "This is James's daily schedule," she explained, pointing to a color-coded chart. "Blue is meals and snacks. You'll find everything prepared and labeled in the refrigerator. Green is structured play activities. The educational toys he should use during these periods are on the labeled shelves in the playroom. Yellow is outdoor time, weather permitting, though please keep him on the patio, not the lawn. We're having issues with ants. Red is nap time, absolutely sacred. He goes down at 12:30 precisely and usually sleeps until 2:45. I nodded, taking in the military precision with which they had organized a toddler's day. His current favorite book is the one about dinosaurs, but only read it once. Otherwise, he'll demand it repeatedly and won't get proper language variety. He's allowed 30 minutes of screen time on the educational tablet, program already selected. No sugar, limited carbs in the afternoon as they make him too energetic before bedtime. If he asks for his blue truck, it's in the basket by the sofa, but try to redirect him to the shape sorting activity instead. It's better for cognitive development. The instructions continued, covering everything from acceptable phrases for redirection, "we don't hit" was preferred over no hitting, to the specific ambient noise machine settings for nap time. Michael hovered nearby, occasionally adding details or clarifications. Their anxiety was palpable, as if leaving their child with his own grandmother was equivalent to abandoning him with an untested stranger. "I've got it," I assured them, trying to project confident competence despite feeling increasingly overwhelmed by their expectations. "James will be fine. You both need to go or you'll be late." With visible reluctance, they finally departed, Vanessa turning back at the door one last time. "Call if anything at all seems off. And remember, consistent boundaries are crucial at this developmental stage." Then they were gone, and for the first time, I was alone with my grandson. James regarded me warily from his high chair, a half-eaten piece of whole-grain toast clutched in one chubby hand. "Where's Mommy?" "Mommy and Daddy had to go to work today," I explained, sitting beside him. "But guess what? You get to spend the whole day with Grandma Eleanor. We're going to have so much fun together." He considered this information with adorable seriousness. "Play trucks?" I glanced at the schedule, noting that the 8:15 to 9-hour block was designated for fine motor skill development activities, not vehicle play. But the hopeful look in James's eyes, so reminiscent of Michael at the same age, made my decision easy. "We can absolutely play trucks," I agreed, "as soon as you finish your breakfast." That simple deviation set the tone for our day together. We followed the broad outlines of Vanessa's schedule: meals, nap, outdoor time, but within those parameters, I allowed James to lead our activities based on his interests. When he tired of the educational shape-sorting game after just a few minutes, I didn't redirect him back to it, but instead followed him to the bookshelf where he pulled out not the dinosaur book, but a well-worn volume about construction vehicles. "Again," he insisted after the first reading, and contrary to instructions, I read it again, and again, and again, until he had memorized certain phrases and began reading along with me, his delight in the repetition and growing mastery obvious. During outdoor time, we didn't stay neatly on the patio as instructed. Instead, we ventured onto the lawn, discovering another ladybug, a serendipitous reconnection to our moment at the birthday party, examining interesting pebbles, and yes, observing a line of ants with fascination rather than fear. I taught him to be gentle with these small creatures, to observe without disturbing, to appreciate the intricate world beneath our feet. Lunch was the prepared organic meal from the refrigerator, but when James asked for a cookie afterward, apparently, a forbidden weekday treat, I broke off a small piece of the one I'd brought in my own bag, placing it on his plate with a conspiratorial wink. "Our secret, okay?" I whispered, and his solemn nod, followed by a chocolate-smeared grin, created another thread in the tapestry of connection I was so desperately trying to weave. Nap time arrived, and here I did follow the precise protocol: the white noise, machine, the room-darkening shades, the specific sequence of settling activities. James fell asleep quickly, one small hand curled around my finger, his breathing deep and even. I sat beside his bed long after I could have left, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the fan of his eyelashes, the perfect bow of his lips. The afternoon continued in the same vein, nominal adherence to the schedule, but with flexibility that allowed for spontaneity and joy. We built towers with blocks, not just focusing on counting and colors as the educational guidelines suggested, but creating imaginative structures that became farms for plastic animals, garages for beloved trucks, castles for the dinosaurs from his favorite book. By the time Michael returned home at 6:30, Vanessa's event would keep her out later, he explained, James and I had established a rapport that felt natural and unforced. He ran to greet his father, but then immediately turned back to me, tugging my hand. "Grandma Eleanor made tower," he announced proudly, pulling me toward the living room where our block creation still stood. Big tower for dinosaurs." Michael followed, his expression a mixture of surprise and something harder to identify. Perhaps recognition of a side of his son he hadn't seen before, or maybe remembrance of his own childhood moments with me. "Wow, that's quite the structure," he acknowledged, examining our creation. "And you two had a good day together?" "The best," I said simply. "He's a remarkable child, Michael. So curious and imaginative." "Did he stick to the schedule?" Michael asked, glancing toward the kitchen, where the color-coded chart still lay. "Vanessa will want to know." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. We covered all the important elements: meals, nap, outdoor time, but we were a bit flexible. Within those parameters. Michael's brow furrowed slightly. Flexible how? We read the truck book 4 times instead of moving on after one reading. We explored the yard beyond the patio. We may have shared a tiny bit of cookie. I held his gaze, unapologetic. We followed his interests, Michael. Children need some freedom to discover what truly engages them. I expected pushback, perhaps even anger at my disregard for their carefully constructed routine. Instead, Michael's expression softened as he watched James demonstrating how the tower was tall enough for the T-Rex to stand inside. "He seems happy," he said quietly. "More animated than usual, actually." "Children thrive on genuine connection," I said carefully, not wanting to sound critical of their parenting, but needing to voice this fundamental truth. On being seen and heard for who they truly are, not just who we want them to be. Michael was silent for a long moment, watching his son play. Something in his posture reminded me of the boy he had been, curious, uninhibited, eager to explore without fear of doing things incorrectly. "I should get him ready for dinner," he finally said, turning toward the kitchen. "Vanessa will want to know exactly what he ate today, how long he napped, which activities he completed." "Of course," I agreed, beginning to gather my things. I kept notes. This was a small lie. I had made no such documentation, but I could reconstruct the day well enough to satisfy Vanessa's need for information. "Mom," Michael said suddenly, stopping me as I reached for my purse. Would you be willing to do this again? Not regularly, but maybe occasionally when the nanny needs a day off? James clearly enjoys being with you." The request was casual, almost hesitant, but it represented a seismic shift in our relationship, an acknowledgement that I had something valuable to offer his son, that my presence might be beneficial rather than merely tolerated. "I'd love that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotion welling in my chest. "Anytime you need me." As I drove home that evening, I felt a cautious hope blooming. Perhaps this day had opened a door that had previously been firmly closed, not just to more time with James, but to a reconsideration of what my role in his life could be. Perhaps Michael had glimpsed something in our interaction that reminded him of his own childhood, of the freedom and unconditional love that had been the foundation of our relationship before Vanessa and the Harringtons had reframed it as deprivation. My optimism, however, proved premature. The call inviting me to care for James again didn't come the following week, or the week after. When I finally reached out to Michael asking about a visit, he explained that their new nanny had started and was working out beautifully. "She's got early childhood education certification and speaks 3 languages, he added, as if this somehow explained why my services were no longer required. I swallowed my disappointment and suggested instead an outing. Perhaps I could take James to the Children's Museum one weekend afternoon? The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes before Michael finally responded. "I'd need to discuss it with Vanessa," he said carefully. "She's very particular about his activities right now. We're focusing on structured learning experiences rather than general stimulation." The implied criticism was clear. My approach to childcare, my very presence in James's life, was classified as merely general stimulation rather than valuable education. The door that had seemed to open a crack had been firmly closed again. Weeks passed with no invitation to visit, not even the supervised sessions I'd grown accustomed to. When I called, Michael was always apologetic but vague. They were just so busy. James had entered a challenging phase. Vanessa's mother was visiting. They had plans with friends who had children James's age. Each excuse was plausible in isolation, but collectively they painted an unmistakable picture. I was being deliberately excluded. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Michael standing there, soaking wet, with no umbrella, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Mom," he said simply, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" I ushered him inside, alarmed by his appearance. His normally immaculate suit was rumpled, his tie askew, his hair uncombed. He looked as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly in distress. "What's happened?" I asked, immediately fearing something had happened to James. "Is everyone all right?" "No," he said, dropping onto my sofa with none of his usual careful composure. "Nothing is all right. Everything is falling apart." I sat beside him, restraining myself from bombarding him with questions, giving him space to explain in his own time. "The company is under investigation," he finally said, staring at his hands. "Securities fraud. The CEO and several executives have been arrested. I'm not directly implicated. I wasn't senior enough to be involved in the decisions. But everyone in the upper management tier has been placed on leave while they sort through who knew what." "Michael, that's terrible," I said, genuinely concerned. "But surely they'll clear you if you weren't involved." "Eventually, probably. But in the meantime, I'm without income, and we've been." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Living beyond our means for a while now. The house, Vanessa's charity commitments, James's nanny and classes and organic food service. It all adds up. We've been using lines of credit to maintain our lifestyle, assuming my year-end bonus would cover any shortfalls." The picture was becoming clearer. "And now there's no bonus coming. No bonus, no salary, no prospects for the immediate future." He looked up at me, his expression raw with a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "I didn't want to worry you, but it's bad, Mom. Really bad. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Vanessa's parents would normally help, but Richard's business is struggling too. Something about tariffs affecting his import supply chains. They've already extended themselves about as far as they can." I took a deep breath, sorting through the implications. "Have you looked into refinancing? Or maybe a loan consolidation to lower your monthly payments?" He nodded. "We've applied for a refinance loan to catch up on the mortgage and consolidate some of the other debts, lower the monthly payments. But because of the company situation and the fact that I have no current income, they need a cosigner, someone with stable income and good credit." And there it was, the real reason for his visit, the explanation for his sudden appearance after weeks of avoidance. He needed something from me. Not my company, not my childcare services, not my presence in his family's life, my financial backing. "You want me to co-sign your loan," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "We wouldn't ask if we weren't." "Desperate," he replied, echoing almost exactly what I'd once heard Vanessa say about another request. "We could lose the house, Mom. James could lose his home." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. James had become the bargaining chip, the emotional lever they assumed would override any hesitation I might have about entangling myself in their financial disaster. And the worst part was, it was working. The thought of my grandson facing disruption and distress over the loss of his home was genuinely distressing. "If I co-sign," I said slowly, "I'm legally responsible for the payments if you can't make them. You understand that, right?" "I'll find another job," he insisted, leaning forward earnestly. "I've got interviews lined up with several firms, connections from business school. This is temporary, I promise." I wanted to believe him, but as I looked at my son, this man who had become almost a stranger to me, who had allowed his wife and in-laws to marginalize me, who had only appeared at my door when he needed something, I found myself wondering if I really knew him at all anymore. "Before I answer," I said carefully, "I'd like to understand something. Why have I not been invited to see James in nearly 2 months? Why, after that one day of babysitting when things seemed to go so well, have I been systematically excluded? From his life again?" Michael had the grace to look ashamed, his eyes dropping to his hands. "It's complicated, Mom. I'm sure it is, but I'd like to hear your explanation anyway." He sighed deeply. Vanessa was upset. "When she found out about your day with James, about how you'd deviated from the schedule, taken him in the yard despite her instructions, given him sweets against the rules, she felt like you'd deliberately undermined her parenting choices." "I followed the spirit, if not the exact letter of her instructions," I countered. "And James had a wonderful day. You saw that yourself." "I know," he admitted quietly. "But Vanessa is very invested in doing everything right with James. The best educational approaches, the optimal nutrition, the developmentally appropriate activities. When James kept asking about you, about doing the things you'd done together, it made her feel inadequate somehow, like she wasn't the fun parent. So rather than incorporating some of that freedom and joy into his routine, she decided to eliminate me from the equation entirely?" Michael winced at the bluntness of my assessment. She thought it would be better to have a clean break. No confusion about expectations or rules. And her mother agreed. "Catherine thought you might be a disruptive influence on James's development." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I had been excised from my grandson's life not because I had harmed him or put him at risk, but because I had connected with him too successfully. Because I had shown him a different way of being, one with more freedom and spontaneity than the regimented existence his parents and maternal grandparents prescribed. "And you agreed to this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You were willing to cut me out of James's life because I made him laugh and explore and enjoy himself too much?" "I didn't agree," he protested weakly. "But I was caught in the middle. Vanessa was adamant, and she's his mother, and I didn't want to cause conflict in our home." "So you chose the path of least resistance," I finished for him, "as you always do when it comes to Vanessa and her family." He didn't deny it, which was something at least, a small acknowledgement of the pattern that had defined our relationship for years. We sat in heavy silence for several minutes, the only sound the rain pattering against the windows and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw both the man he had become and the boy he had been. I saw his father's chin, his grandfather's eyes, the genetic echoes of generations who had come before. And I saw my own influence, too, in the way he bit his lip when anxious, in the thoughtful crease between his brows, in the gentleness of his hands despite everything else. "I'll think about the loan," I said finally. "But if, and that's a big, if I decide to help, there will be conditions, non-negotiable ones." He nodded quickly, relief flooding his features at even this tentative opening. "Of course, anything." "Don't agree so quickly," I warned him. "You haven't heard what I'm asking." "Whatever it is, we'll make it work," he assured me, already rising from the sofa as if the matter were settled. "I should get back. Vanessa will be wondering where I am. Can I tell her you're considering it?" "Tell her I'll be in touch with my decision and my terms in a few days," I replied, showing him to the door. "And Michael, think carefully about what kind of family life you really want. Not just the image of success or the trappings of status, but the substance of your relationships. What will matter to James in 20 years, the optimal educational toys or the knowledge that he was truly seen and accepted for exactly who he is?" He paused at the threshold, raindrops immediately, dotting his shoulders as he stepped outside. For a moment, I thought he might actually engage with the question, might open up about the pressures and expectations that had clearly been shaping his choices. Instead, he simply nodded, murmured thanks, and hurried to his car, leaving me once, again with more questions than answers about the son I had raised and the man he had become. Over the next 3 days, I consulted with my financial advisor and my attorney. At 64, with retirement looming and limited savings, co-signing a substantial loan represented a significant risk to my future security. If Michael defaulted, I would be responsible for payments that could quickly deplete my modest retirement fund. Yet the thought of James losing his home facing the instability and stress of financial crisis, weighed heavily on my heart. "The numbers don't lie, Eleanor," my financial advisor said bluntly. "If you co-sign this loan and your son can't make the payments, you'll be in serious trouble. Your pension won't cover those mortgage payments and your own living expenses." My attorney was equally direct. "If you decide to proceed despite the risks, we need to establish clear, legally binding conditions. This isn't just about money. It's about establishing boundaries and expectations." By the time I invited Michael and Vanessa to my apartment, the following Sunday, I had made my decision. They arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued. Vanessa without her usual perfect makeup and designer outfit, Michael with shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. James was not with them. They'd left him with a neighbor, Vanessa explained, so we could speak freely. I served a simple meal, nothing elaborate but nourishing and prepared with care. We ate mostly in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Only after coffee did I finally lay out my terms. "I'll co-sign your loan," I said, watching relief flood their faces. "But here are my conditions. First, I want 1 day a week with James. Every week, no cancellations except for genuine emergencies." They exchanged glances, then nodded quickly. "Second, I want to be included in family events. Real inclusion, not just a token invitation where I'm ignored or seated with strangers. And yes, that includes family photos." Vanessa had the grace to look ashamed. "Third, I want honesty between us from now on. No more secrets, no more pretending. If you have a problem with me or my approach to James, we talk about it directly, instead of excluding me." Michael reached for my hand. "That's more than fair, Mom. We agree to all of it." "There's one more thing," I added. "I want you both to volunteer at the senior center downtown, once a month for the next year." They exchanged confused glances. "The senior center?" Vanessa asked. "Yes. I want you to spend time with people my age, learn their stories, see their humanity beyond their wrinkles and gray hair. Understand that aging isn't something to be hidden away or airbrushed out of family photos. It's something to be respected." It was a bold request, but one I felt necessary for all of us. After a moment's hesitation, they agreed. The loan was approved the following week with my signature alongside theirs. True to their word, they began bringing James every Wednesday, gradually extending those visits until I was a regular, cherished presence in his life. The volunteer work at the senior center, initially approached with reluctance, became something they genuinely valued, especially when Vanessa discovered that one of the residents had been a pioneering female marketing executive with connections still relevant to her career. Michael eventually found a new position, less prestigious than his previous role, but with a company known for its ethical practices and family-friendly policies. The more modest salary meant downsizing from their expensive home to a smaller house, in a less exclusive neighborhood, a change that initially devastated Vanessa, but ultimately proved liberating for all of them. "We're actually happier with less," Michael confided during one of his increasingly frequent solo visits. "The pressure to maintain that lifestyle, to keep up with the Harringtons and their circle, it was exhausting. Now we're making decisions based on what works for our family, not what impresses other people." Vanessa's transformation was more gradual but equally profound. The financial crisis had strained her relationship with her parents, who, facing their own economic challenges, had begun to withdraw both practical support and the implicit approval Vanessa had always craved. Forced to stand on her own, she slowly discovered an independence and resilience she hadn't known she possessed. "I always thought I needed my mother's validation," she admitted one evening as we prepared dinner together while Michael played with James in the next room. Everything had to be perfect, had to meet her standards. But you know what? James doesn't care if his activities are developmentally optimal or if his schedule follows some expert's recommendation. He just wants to feel loved and secure. 6 months after our agreement, A large, professionally framed portrait appeared on the wall of their new, more modest living room. In it, 4 generations stood together: Vanessa's parents, Michael and Vanessa, James and me, standing proudly in the center, wrinkles, gray hair, and all. "I had them Photoshop out that mole on my chin," Vanessa confessed with a small laugh. "But otherwise, it's all authentically us, imperfections and all." It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still times when old habits threatened to resurface. Catherine occasionally made cutting remarks about my influence on James, particularly when he began showing more interest in hands-on exploration than in the structured activities she preferred. Michael sometimes reverted to people-pleasing when tensions arose, trying to smooth over conflicts rather than addressing them directly. But we were trying, all of us, to build something authentic from the ruins of what had been broken. James, now approaching his 3rd birthday, was thriving. His natural curiosity and creativity encouraged rather than constrained. His relationship with all his grandparents enriched by their different perspectives and approaches. As for me, I learned something powerful through this journey. Sometimes being excluded is a blessing in disguise. It forces you to find your own value, apart from others' validation. And sometimes, the very things that make you unphotogenic in someone else's eyes, your age, your experience, your unwillingness to pretend, turn out to be your greatest strengths when the perfect facade finally cracks. On James's 3rd birthday, I watched him blow out the candles on a homemade cake. Nothing fancy, just his favorite chocolate with buttercream frosting. The celebration was small and simple, held in the backyard of Michael and Vanessa's new home. No professional entertainers, no elaborate theme, just family and a few close friends enjoying each other's company. When it came time for gifts, James opened mine first, a set of junior gardening tools and packets of easy-to-grow seeds. "Grandma Eleanor and I are going to make a special garden," he announced with authority, "with flowers for butterflies and vegetables we can eat." Vanessa smiled genuinely. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe you can teach Mommy and Daddy to garden too." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, I found myself sitting beside Catherine, who had gradually become more civil, if not entirely warm, toward me. We watched in companionable silence as James chased bubbles Michael was blowing, his laughter carrying across the lawn. "He's quite something, isn't he?" Catherine remarked. "So different from how Vanessa was at that age. She was always so contained, careful. James just throws himself into everything." "He reminds me of Michael when he was small," I replied. "Always curious, always testing boundaries." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "I wonder sometimes if we did Vanessa a disservice, being so strict about everything. All those rules, all those expectations. She never had the freedom James has now." It was the closest thing to an olive branch she had ever extended, an acknowledgement that perhaps my approach had merit. After all, I accepted it with grace, neither gloating nor dismissing her insight. "Children are resilient," I said simply. "And it's never too late to create new patterns, new ways of being together." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, James climbed into my lap, tired but happy, his small body warm against mine. "Stay, Grandma?" he asked, his eyes already drooping with the exhaustion of excitement. "Not tonight, sweetheart," I told him, smoothing his hair. "But I'll be back on Wednesday for our special day together. We can start planning our garden then." He nodded, satisfied with this promise, secure in the knowledge that I was a fixed, reliable presence in his life, not someone who might disappear or be excluded when inconvenient. Later, as I gathered my belongings to leave, Michael walked me to my car. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said, his voice soft in the gathering twilight. "That day, when I came to ask about the loan, I was prepared for you to refuse, to tell me I'd made my bed and now had to lie in it. It would have been justified, after how we'd treated you." You're my son, I replied simply. And James is my grandson. Family doesn't abandon family when things get difficult. I'm learning that, he said, glancing back at the modest house with its warm, glowing windows. From you. Every day I'm learning what family really means. He hugged me then, a genuine embrace that reminded me of the boy he had been before. Status and appearances had clouded his vision. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took a crisis for me to remember how much. Driving home, I reflected on the journey we'd traveled, from exclusion to grudging inclusion to genuine belonging. It hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been the path I would have chosen, but perhaps it had been necessary. This confrontation with values and priorities, this reckoning with what truly matters in a family's life. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone pinged with a text from Vanessa. James insists you forgot your goodbye kiss. Video chat before bedtime? Attached was a photo of James in his pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd given him at the hospital, his smile wide and uninhibited. I smiled, typing a quick response. Absolutely. Call in 10 minutes. No, it wasn't perfect. But it was real, and it was ours. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.